Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. On today's episode, I will be joined by Mark Preston. He is the founder and chief strategy officer at StreetDrone. And StreetDrone is providing autonomous solutions for delivery and also for our yards, for jockeying trailers around our yards and our warehousing facilities, ports, things of that nature. So we're going to talk to Mark, and we're going to find out about how he kind of came to the way of founding StreetDrone, what is StreetDrone, and how some of the customers are utilizing this technology and how it's evolving over time and where it will be expanding to in the future. So, Mark, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thanks for having me. Yeah, good to be here.
Definitely happy to have you on. Happy to learn more about StreetDrone here. But before we kind of dive into, the everything about StreetDrone, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you kind of came to founding this company, StreetDrone?
Sure. I'm a mechanical engineer actually from Australia originally. Okay. I worked at GM in Australia, one of my first jobs out of university. Funnily enough, I also designed dangerous goods tankers in Australia. So okay. I designed hydrogen peroxide tankers, fuel tankers, milk tankers, and bitumen tankers when I was in Australia. So a bit of experience of the let's say the trucking market. I also grew up on a farm in the middle of New South Wales, which is a state of Australia. So started fixing trucks when I was about 14 or something like that. So I worked at GM in terms of from the point of view of simulation, so crash testing is what I did at GM. And then I'm very interested in motor racing, so I came to the UK in 96 to do Formula One. I worked in Formula One for 10, 15 years, everything from head of R&D. I worked at McLaren Racing in London, started a Formula One team with Honda, so I had lots of experience in that world. And then actually in about 2008, I started to look at EVs. And which direction the world was going there. So I got involved in vehicles and started a Formula Electric racing team. And so went racing around the world, won 5 championships in that series. Nice. With DS Techeetah, which DS is a part of the Stellantis brand, which again, automotive kind of focused, as you can imagine. And then started StreetDrone in 2017 with a few colleagues from F1. So some colleagues from the control systems and design area. And with my partner, Mike, who actually comes from the whole different world in the commercial element of the world, looking at data. And he was the chief data officer of Havas Media and other things. So it's a combination of kind of connected vehicles in terms of digital and good old-fashioned engineering from motorsports and mechanical engineering.
Okay, a very interesting journey and obviously exciting. I'm sure working for Formula One and now coming to StreetDrone and I want to talk a little bit about that transition from Formula One to now the StreetDrone. But tell us a little bit about StreetDrone and what it is exactly, because you have a couple different offerings I think through the company, right?
Yeah, so I mean, when we started in 2017, you couldn't buy an autonomous vehicle. In fact, you can't really buy an autonomous vehicle yet either. Right, yeah. So we realized that we'd have to create, as we say, the picks and shovels of autonomy. So we created a small test vehicle based on what's called a Renault Twizy here in Europe. And then we also sell some vehicles based on Nissan ENV200, which is an electric panel van, and now moving actually to a Ford e-Transit. So we sort of realized that we had to develop the platforms in order to develop the technology on. So we've sold those vehicles to many people around the world. We have customers. I think we've sold about 30 vehicles now to everywhere from all around Europe, Asia, Australia, and other places. And those vehicles are for R&D. And that was really to, get us going. But as time's gone on, we've started to focus down on, where do we see autonomy? And as you know, as probably most people know, there's a lot of, let's say, discontent in some of the areas of autonomy. But we've really started to focus down over the last couple of years in what we're going to chat about, I'm sure, at Nissan, where we're doing what we're kind of calling a first mile logistics. So we're sort of saying it's the logistics at the start of the supply chain.
Okay.
When feeding into the factories, ports, RDCs, or regional distribution centers. So that's kind of how we've kind of grown up and started to focus down on where we see the value in the future.
Very interesting. And I'm curious on the transition there, right? Because Formula One, is very like sleek, fast, sexy, right? And going to, doing deliveries and moving containers around from ports and things like that is not necessarily the sexiest thing, right? So I'm curious, how did that idea kind of spark and lead you down that path to want to pursue this?
Probably one thing about motor racing is you get to solve the hardest problems, and you're at the cutting edge of technology. And so I think, when we were looked around and said, what's happening in, I always say my favorite business, automotive. How do we do stuff playing with trucks and cars and big mechanical devices? It pretty easily comes out to being EV, which was the next step back in when I started looking at it anyway, back in 2008. And it's taken a while to transition, and it's starting to, you would say maybe EVs hitting the inflection point, and especially in actually the area of logistics, EV is really taking off, as you know. The amount of, Amazon vehicles being sold, electric vehicles, and the delivery vehicles all here in the UK, and I'm sure in the US, the amount of electric delivery vehicles now compared to internal combustion engine is quite phenomenal, I suppose, the change. And then, if you look at automotive in general, you would say that it's connected, autonomous, shared, electric. And so connected, we're also involved in. Autonomous is what we're doing. Shared, maybe not quite so much in this industry, but certainly that in other passenger vehicles. And electric. So autonomous is part of the future. It won't come as early as we all think or thought on the roads, but certainly in these constrained environments, as you know, as they say, the operational design domain, where we know what's going on in a site and how it's constrained. It's funny, we were actually sort of saying that racing cars are kind of like caged robots. They sit in a racetrack. It's very controlled.
That's true, yeah.
There's fences around them. It's a known ODD, and you're pushing the boundaries of, everything in that zone. So in some ways, there's a lot of similarities in that point of view, where at least where we're focusing in these early days is on constrained environments where we can control more of the variables, at least in the short term. And then as time goes on, we can go further out from these like distribution centers and manufacturing plants. So that's the kind of process. I do always enjoy pioneering things. And that's one thing about motor racing is you're always on the cutting edge of pioneering, whether it's electronics or control systems, aerodynamics, processes. There's a lot behind motor racing where it's not just the fast car, it's also fast development, fast production, fast manufacturing, fast, systems and processes behind the scenes to deliver actually a pace of development, which fits well with things like autonomy.
Right. Yeah. It's an interesting point there. And I think it's very interesting because, it's, like I said, it's like the sleek and sexy world, right, of a Formula One, and now the delivery and the clunkiness, of boxes coming off ships and things like that. You don't necessarily always have those things, right? But it's interesting how you said the process is faster on development for Formula One, and you're kind of taking that mindset and ethos and bringing that into the logistics supply chain world. And I think that's a great thing, right? Because we need to, logistics supply chain, it never stops moving, right? So in order to be able to advance and do these things, like we want to be able to develop and bring new solutions faster than, you know, we initially would do maybe in a normal business setting or something like that. So we can tackle some of these complex challenges, especially that we've had in the past couple of years. So it's really interesting what you're doing. So tell us a little bit about the Smart One terminal tractor, because I think you have two offerings now, right? You have the Smart One terminal tractor and then the Pix E, I believe. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the Smart One terminal tractor? What is that intended purpose, and how does that kind of work?
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, we got an opportunity to work with Nissan and specifically their supply chain partner, Hitachi Vantech, who does the inbound logistics at the large manufacturing plant in Sunderland in the north of the UK. And they wanted to look at, you know, what's the future of logistics in their world. And when you look at the site, there's a number of big just-in-time warehouses that sit around the main factory, about 2 miles on a private land. It's reasonably common in automotive around the world, although many of the OEMs do manage slightly differently, at least at the Nissan facility in the UK. Obviously, you've got parts coming in from all around the world, plus Europe, plus locally close to the site. So this particular facility that we transfer parts from the warehouse, which is outside the main manufacturing center, across to the main Nissan site. As you know, with automotive manufacturing, if you stop the line, it's not great because of course, if you stop the line, there's a car coming off the end of the line every minute. So, you know, someone was saying to me, just think about how much stuff has to come into that manufacturing site in order for a car to come out the other end every minute. There's a lot of stuff that has to be delivered into that manufacturing warehouse every hour, let's say. So the initial proof of concept, which we finished middle of last year, and now looking to the future about the next stages, we did actually start with a combination of autonomy and teleoperation as we started to integrate with the site. So, for example, there's some places along the journey where there's a barrier, or there's some things that are based on the site for security and other elements where we needed the truck to come along and stop and wait for someone to open the barrier, for example. So the great thing is we got a lot of the truck drivers involved from the Nissan site, and they helped us develop the technology. So at the beginning, we had this teleoperation station, which allowed the same truck drivers that normally drove the trucks to be able to operate the barriers. And if there was a problem with the vehicle, let's say it was raining too hard or something like that, they could reverse the vehicle if it was having some issues, for example. But as time went on, we learned from their experiences of driving the trucks in order to, for example, do what we think might have been one of the first reversing maneuvers, where it's great watching a semi-trailer come up and then reverse itself into the dock. That was a pretty big day for the engineers when they figured out how to get the trailer to reverse. That was a big, exciting day for everybody. So I'd say those are some of the things that people said to us that was never going to be possible. Took the engineers a little bit of a while to figure it out, but once they figured it out, it's become quite an interesting, because I'll give you an example. We put the truck and trailer onto what they call a black lake, which is basically a big piece of tarmac for doing testing. And asked the truck to basically back itself around a big circle. And then the truck drivers tried to do that in the teleoperation and couldn't sort of get it to reverse all the way back around to the same place. And so it was fun kind of, creating challenges where initially the software couldn't do the job, and we'd use the teleoperation to prove it out. And then basically we would figure out how we could automate that. So it's been a really good relationship, and many of the guys enjoy driving the trucks in teleoperation mode because they can sit in an air-conditioned office and drive the trucks around the site. So it's been a really interesting journey with them.
Interesting. And I'm curious there because you mentioned involving the existing truck drivers, right, in the process and the development. And, a lot of times the conversation around autonomy and bringing autonomous vehicles, whether it's, robots or autonomous trucks like this into an operation, there's concerns that, jobs will be lost or something like that. So how was when it started to bring in these trucks in the Nissan location, how was the reception from the workers or the truck drivers of, this autonomous vehicle kind of maybe potentially, taking their spot at some point, or what was kind of the reaction there?
It's been really interesting because the truck drivers up at Nissan have been actually the biggest evangelists for, the technology increasing, because it's not going to switch overnight to autonomy. There's still a lot of jobs that are going to require interactions. And also, as you know, the world is, there's a lack of truck drivers everywhere in every country. And so actually, I think a lot of people have commented to us, they'd rather use the skilled guys to do the jobs that we can't do, for example, at the moment, because if they can't get enough truck drivers, then we need to be able to leverage the skills of those currently trained truck drivers to do the jobs that we can't maybe do for the beginning and in the initial stages. And then we've seen a lot of in other sites, as we start to look at other places in the world, we can also see there's a big element of safety. When you look at the cranes on the ports, on the docks, a lot of those cranes around the world are now operated through a teleoperation type system, so you can get the person away from the dangerous settings, because as you know, with AGVs and other trucks rushing around a site like this, the safety element is actually bigger than you would expect until you go and sort of see the amount of vehicles moving around, especially at at peak times. So I can see that there's a number of elements to this, that the guys will still need, I believe, a certain amount of interaction with the teleoperators, who can, maybe one person could look after 5 to 10 trucks and help whenever there's a difficult situation, because a lot of these sites have mixed mode traffic. So you'll have HGVs or semi-trailers coming in from externally, dropping off loads, and autonomous trucks moving around. And so the combination of safety and moving between certain parts of the site in ports and other things might require different elements. The thing we also see is that you may have the very close into the main site is controlled, but typically in a manufacturing site, you'll have an innovation park, let's say, around the manufacturing site where the tier one suppliers are. So you'll have 20 or 30 tier ones who are pushing goods into the main manufacturing site, and they are on public roads. And therefore, there's going to be maybe some elements as we develop and the rules develop and the rules of driving on the road develop, where we can use a combination of people and machines, let's say, to solve the total system. So we see there's lots of opportunities, and certainly, let's say, the guys up there were some of the biggest evangelists for the development of all the technology.
Very interesting, and I think that's a good thing, because it's good to see them recognizing that this will benefit them and help them with the workload, and it's great that you touched on the safety as well, because I think that's a huge thing, right? In these, you mentioned, these busy, congested areas, and lots of moving parts, things going on. Safety is a huge thing, and it can be a very, very dangerous area. Even just recently, I just heard of an accident that happened at a place that I used to work in, just out in the small yard of the warehouse. So, with these trucks moving around and trailers connecting up and containers moving around, there's a lot of opportunities for something to go wrong. So taking the human element away from those dangerous areas, I think, is a huge step in protecting everybody. So it's a great thing. So with that being said, you mentioned in there, regular trucks, human-driven trucks, I guess we'll call them, right? Coming in and out as well, and some of these setups where suppliers are close by, but they have to go on public roads to deliver goods and supplies, things like that. Where do you think we are in the journey to, I guess, driving down a public road one day and looking next to me and seeing that, hey, there's nobody in that truck, but it's moving? I mean, where do you think we are in terms of having these autonomous vehicles or trucks being on the road and delivering, going outside the port or outside of just these private roads and bringing loads to warehouses in different locations?
Yeah, I mean, if I look to the US, and for me, looking from the outside, having been from Australia, where you've got those B doubles that, go across the middle of the country, where they run for, 15 hours across the Nullarbor and things like that. I think what we can see from looking at the US from outside, a lot of the trucking routes I think it's the southeast, is it? Where there's some big open stretches of road which are very straight and very known, and there's not much rain, and you're going between hubs. They make complete sense because that's like the first step of staying on a very fixed path. Running, the vehicles can be utilized more, obviously, because instead of having one person who can drive maybe 8 hours a day, that truck can run 24/7, even if it has to maybe even run slower at the beginning.
Yeah.
But it can run consistently and constantly. I was actually listening to another podcast the other day where they said that a number of people are now saying even people can't do level 5. So if a person can't do level 5, how can a vehicle? I think, going back to the racetrack, it's a cage. We have a very constrained set of parameters in order to push the boundaries of technology. So I always find that when you want to do development of something new and risky, you need to limit down variables so that you can take a nice step-by-step approach. So, for example, at the Nissan site, I would see that, we continue to develop within the site, which is private roads. There's some elements of private roads with public access. Now we can the public don't really go there, but they have public access. And then you will have, as I said before, on that sort of innovation park, we can work with the local government to limit speed to 20 miles an hour because that's enough moving between, because it's not like there's lots of people just driving around there every day because it's an industrial setting. So by increasing the variables a step at a time, that's where I see you get to bigger parameters. I mean, when I started to do Formula Electric racing, people actually said to us, you can't actually race electric cars. You can't.
Really?
What do you mean you can't?
Yeah.
Well, they'll just burst into flames. It's like, why will they burst into flames? Well, just because they're electric. Now, 10 years later, we're now, doing amazing speeds on tracks all around the world, race on the same circuits as Formula One.
Yeah.
So, at the beginning of something, it does feel always impossible. And going back to, you said, why did you go from F1 to autonomous vehicles? Wherever the biggest pioneering element is and the biggest challenges. So I know I haven't answered your question completely, but I think it will be a staged process. If you look at the variables of where some of those trucking companies in the US are traveling between hubs, where slowly you can increase the number of variables. The weather's fairly controlled. The roads are very known. The amount of roads, the people on the roads is less. As you start building towards where, for example, Waymo and Cruise are in San Francisco, they're starting to build on the capability. So I think the whole thing will move together. When will we be able to drive downtown in London, for example, or in New York or something like that? That's a little way off. But let's say there's plenty to do, where we all are now before we get to maybe those super difficult challenges.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah, I was curious on that because I'm always, waiting to see, when is there's going to be a truck just drive by me on the highway and no one's in there. I think that would be a interesting day. But, it's great to hear your thoughts on that. And I think, it makes sense what you're saying, that it's going to be this staged approach. And, obviously there's, we talk about the safety element as well. And, we want to make sure that, when something's, doesn't have a human to control it in any way. Not saying that, all humans are the safest on the roads either. But, we want to make sure that somebody can, control it or take over is very important to be able to do that. But certainly, as you see, and as you kind of talked about here, and as we see, internally on these private settings and private roads and things like that, it's certainly beneficial to have these autonomous trucks and the autonomy of vehicles being able to move goods around and enable people to do greater things and more complex things, and also just increase the safety as well, and getting to a point, I think, where someone doesn't have to spend days in a truck on the road and having to deliver goods and then just drive right back or something like that. I think is a very good thing that we can achieve at some point and get to. I think that would be great for humanity as a whole. So as we talk about getting on the road with autonomous vehicles and things of that, your other offering in StreetDrone is the Pix E, right? Which the Pix E is more of, we talked about the Smart One terminal tractor, which I think is kind of that first mile in a sense, maybe you're referring to.
Yes.
And the Pixie now is more on the other side of the spectrum, I believe, and the last mile, right? So this is kind of like a smaller autonomous vehicle that's delivering packages, I think, to residential, right? So tell us a little bit about that vehicle and how that kind of works, and is that out in the world somewhere now working, or how is that going?
Yeah, so the first vehicle we did when we started StreetDrone was, as I said previously, the Renault Twizy, which is a little two-seater. In Europe, it's called L7E. In the US, the equivalent is probably neighborhood electric vehicle. So like a golf cart, so smaller vehicle, maximum speed 20-25 miles an hour. So again, very controlled in its parameters. The UK is looking to roll out vehicles on the roads in 2025, but it's going to be a very staged approach, and similar to the US. I think most countries in the world are following a similar timing. This vehicle is based on the Renault Twizy, so as I say, L7E, small electric neighborhood electric vehicle, which is limited to speed. So you probably see, I'm not sure how it is in the US, but in Europe, many cities are going to, they're saying 20 is plenty. So, if you look at Paris, many cities around the UK and other cities in Europe, they're actually limiting speeds to 20 miles an hour in residential zones and within the city. So we see instead of going from, let's say, a hub in a region to somebody's house, there'll be more of these, what we're going to call them, hyper-local dark stores. So, that certainly works in certain highly dense areas like places in the UK and maybe Asia. Not quite sure about how it might work in the US, with it sort of more spread out, same as Australia, where I'm from. They may not be quite the same. But yeah, this is a small last mile delivery vehicle. We have a level 2 version, which is based on the Renault Twizy, which a number of people are doing R&D with that vehicle around the world. We're currently talking to a number of retailers about doing proof of concepts where, we take a residential zone of maybe, let's say, the target would be sort of 2,500 to 5,000 households. Low speed roads, things delivered from I suppose, a micro hub. I'm not sure what the right terminology is, depends where you are in the world as to that definition. But, going from a central shop, dark store on that residential zone and delivering out to households. So that we see, that's like, in our opinion, that's like second stage. I mean, there's obviously Neuro in the US doing things, and there's a number of startups in China as well that we see. That's, as I say, in the UK, at least. In Europe, it looks as though it's 2025 and onwards. So this is where we sort of saying, okay, we start first mile in the industrial zones. We start to move slightly outside of those industrial zones in very controlled areas, as we said, in the logistics parks. And the next logical step is, well, if you can operate in a logistics park at 20 miles an hour, maybe maximum is certainly where we see it, then can you go then to residential zones where you're taking many of the same constraints and just start scaling up one more step, not trying to drive between two cities, but driving within a zone which is very known, very defined, very controlled. That's how we see the staging. So you can see where we see the staging of complexity, basically. And What's the timing on that? That's, of course, dependent on funding and rules and regulations changes and how we go with the development. They're in controlled zones like the Nissan plant, and that will be a staged approach we see. So, yeah, quite exciting developments.
Very interesting. Yeah. I think it's interesting because I have a micro fulfillment center myself, and certainly in that dense area, you could see where something like this would work very well. Whereas you have a lot of different touch points, with people picking up, and if you go to ship something like UPS or something here in the States, and it gets picked up, and maybe it's going like just a couple miles away, but it's you doing something like this, just loading it on here and then having it go direct to that, cuts down a lot of different steps in the chain, right? So I think it makes sense, and it'd be interesting to see how this evolves and how it's able to provide that kind of last mile delivery and provide that denser area, an easier way to get product and faster as well. I think less steps in the chain, I think, makes a lot of sense. So it's very interesting stuff here from you, Mark, about StreetDrone, and very interesting journey as well, I think, to get to StreetDrone and to found this company. And it'd be really interesting to see how this develops and how the technology is received by the market, and just how autonomy develops as a whole overall. So I want to thank you for coming on the show today and talking to me about this. And it was great to learn more about StreetDrone and be able to hear about how the technology is working in place right now. And I'd be interested to hear how it evolves over time, and check in with you later in a year or so and see how things have evolved even more. It'd be great to see. So I want to thank you for coming on the show today. And if people are interested in learning more about StreetDrone, how can they do that?
That's easy. Go to our website, so www.streetdrone.com, StreetDrone, just to make sure you understand the spelling. But yeah, it's great, and thanks for having us, and we'll keep listening to the podcast.
Definitely. We'll put all that information about StreetDrone at thenewwarehouse.com as well. So, Mark, thank you once again for your time on the show today.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the New Warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.